Okay, Guilty came in for number 1. How are you doing today? You get to the bookstore. Boom. There we go. Why is my model not moving? Oh, come on. Don't give me that crap. I haven't changed anything on my phone settings at all. Mm-hmm. Why is it not connecting? Okay. What the hell? What is it with my network? Oh, my Wi-Fi is turned off for some reason. That's weird. Come on. Awaken! There we go. Ah, craziness. It does happen here. Pretty good. Just loving the fact that my stuff doesn't like working for some reason. I don't know if my audio is working. Can I hear myself? Oh, yep, I can hear myself. Okay. Okay, turn that off. Okay. I wonder if my audio alerts are working. No, I don't want to open the dashboard. What the heck? Open my channel just so I can hear my own sound alerts. Yeah, it's been a pretty good day, kind of slow. Not flooding like it was last night. Though the rain was bad enough that, from what I heard, even cross-tie blinds were floating downstream. That was loud. Oh, okay, my throne panel is actually working for once. That's cool. And I guess you heard that, right? You didn't? What the hell? No. I really wonder about sound alerts sometimes. It got to the point that I was having to use the desktop audio for anything to actually play, which isn't how it's supposed to work, but seems to be the only way it wants to work. a little bit of an echo to it. And my microphone's kind of quiet. What's going on with my microphone? I must increase my volume because I am quiet. And why is there offset on my microphone? It's crazy. Okay, maybe now I can be heard a little bit better. Though it isn't showing. Oh, well, my mic tried to peek out just then. Let's see. And as strange as it is to have my recorded awoo, a live one would be even stranger. Yeah. I'm hearing it echoed. That's. Oh, because. Alright. I have to mute my window so I don't get the echo. But you're hearing it now, right? I hope. Okay. Okay. Gee, should I do a live awoo just to be that way? Of course, I have to move my mic away from my mouth so I don't blare it out. Oh, my window's closed. Okay. The only bad is if I tried to do it, my microphone would time out for the constant sound. I can't even remember. Oh, I recorded the other one with my phone, that's why. What is a Zora? Okay. So many freaking Pokemon. I don't even know what's what anymore. But still. What the hell? I'm going to do it. Move my microphone away from my mouth because I don't need to blare it out. Because I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. It's going to be loud. Ooh, my voice cracked. Oh, that scared you? Why? It's just a howl. Oh, well, an unexpected howl, I suppose. So should I warn you if I'm going to do it again? Oh, sure. Now, what's about? Did you even do the shit? Okay, well, that was very delayed and inaccurate. Weird. Oh, I didn't show a game. Weird. It didn't even post your page. Stream elements, you have failed me again. You have to look to see what it is. Yeah, one of those things. Let's see. Recent thing. Okay, it's a little land looking thing. Okay. All the things that Fuzzbot has. It's got moderate. Oh yeah, that's hmm. Oh, now that message plays. Wait a minute, why is the laugh not there? Weird. Should be there. Hmm. I'm supposed to have that in there. Oh well. So, since the last time scared you, I'm going to go ahead and say I'm going to howl because I feel like howling. So. Oh! I can't remember what the longest howl I've done is. Of course, I howl better standing up than I do sitting down. But that's just me. Must get that lung capacity. As opposed to all these, people just going, ah woo. Not that it isn't cute, but, ah woo. Oh, God, you clicked it. I always love the weird ass names they come up with. Cathish important kumquat kippa hish. Classic. Okay. Where do they get the folder names for that? File names? That's just weird. That's for that word. Yeah, my microphone killed it. That's funny. My microphone did not like that whole howl, and the audio shows it. You can see I'm still doing it. It just kind of cuts out a lot. Oh, yes. Oh well. Uh, guess there's some news. My book, since I went ahead and went with a completely independent publisher, if you look down on the panels, it has one that says under the links, "My book's for sale." My book is now on sale. It is a order to print, so They don't print it until you order it, which I guess is a good thing. But hey, it's a book. I didn't even bother putting the link for the Amazon ebook one. Still. And I think it's funny because you can find it also on my Throne store because I just put the link there. And I'm still trying to save money so I can get the official artwork, but I'm just a little over halfway there on that one. So eventually I'll get the art cover. And the artist will get more publicity because they're trying to do an auction right now and that's not getting hits. It's bad because Kunstwolf really does good work. It is really kind of a shame that they're not getting the sales that they would like to, but I try to repost their stuff as often as they post. So. So they do a lot of Fox girls. Hot Fox girls. But that's just me. Anyway, I'm supposed to be reading because I'm already 8 minutes behind schedule. But a wizard is never early, wizard is never late. They start precisely when they intend to. Something like that. I'm just barely halfway through this book. So let's get to the library. If my chat screen reload, there it is. That is a mess. So. Why is my voice? Which I can be heard. Let's see if I can just arrange for a certain pitch. No, my microphone cuts off. That is just absurd. But anyway. Reading. Because that's what we do here. We read. And occasionally play games. So try not to bleed to death. Our first. Hey, EB. How are you doing today? Pyong. Pyong, pyong. Pyong, pyong. Pyong. Do, 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 do. What was I doing? Oh yeah, I was opening the book. Dang it, now I have that song in my head. Rise, empires fall, and you've seen each other through it all. Okay. Why do villain songs have to be so catchy? Okay. So many people on right now. Okay. Anywho. Our first story for the night is The King Who Would Have a Beautiful Wife, as taken from the Pink Fairy book. 40 years ago, there lived a king who was very anxious to get married. But as he was quite determined that his wife should be as beautiful as the sun, the thing was not as so easy as it seemed, for no maiden came up to his high standard. Then he commanded a trusty servant to search through the length and breadth of the land until he found a girl fair enough to be the queen, and if he had good luck to discover one, he was to bring her back with him. One day, of course I skipped a paragraph. The servant set out at once on his journey, and sought high and low, in castles and cottages. But though pretty maidens were plentiful as blackberries, he felt sure that none of them would please the king. One day he had wandered far and wide, and was feeling very tired and thirsty. By the roadside stood a tiny little house, and here he knocked and asked for a cup of water. Now, in this house dwelt two sisters. One was 80 and the other 90 years old. They were very poor and earned their living by spinning. This had kept their hands very soft and white, like the hands of a girl, and when the water passed through the lattice, and the servants saw the small, delicate fingers, he said to himself, "A maiden must be lovely if she has a hand like that." And he made haste and told the king. "Go back at once," said his majesty, "and try to get a sight of her." The faithful servant departed on his errand without losing any time, and again he knocked at the door of the little house, and begged for some water. As before, the old woman did not open the door, but passed the hand through the lattice. "Do you live alone here?" asked the man. "No," replied she. "My sister lives with me. We are poor girls and have to work for our bread." "How old are you?" "I am 15 and she is 20. Liars. The servant went back to the king and told him all he knew. And his majesty answered, "I will have the 15-year-old one. Go and bring her here." The servant returned a third time to the little house, and knocked at the door. In reply to his knock, the lattice window was pushed open, and a voice inquired what it was he wanted. "The king has desired me to bring back the youngest of you to become his queen," he replied. "Tell his majesty I am ready to do his bidding. But since my birth no ray of light has fallen upon my face. If I should ever do so, I shall instantly grow black. Therefore beg, I pray you, his most gracious majesty, to send this evening a shut carriage, and I will return in it to the castle." When the king heard this, he ordered his great golden carriage to be prepared, and in it to be placed some magnificent robes. And the old woman wrapped herself in a thick veil and was driven to the castle. The king was eagerly awaiting her, and when she arrived, he begged her politely to raise her veil, and let him see her face. But, she answered, here the tapers are too bright and the light too strong. Would you have me turn black under your very eyes? And the king believed her words, and the marriage took place without the veil being lifted even once. Afterward, when they were alone, he raised the corner and knew for the first time that he had wedded a wrinkled old woman. And in a furious burst of anger, he dashed open the window and flung her out. As one does. But, luckily for her, her clothes caught on a nail in the wall and kept her hanging between heaven and earth. While she was thus suspended, expecting every moment to be dashed to the ground, 4 fairies just happened to pass by. Look, sisters, cried one, surely that is the old woman that the king sent for. Shall we wish that her clothes gave way, and that she should be dashed to the ground? Oh, no, no, exclaimed another. Let us wish her something good. I myself will wish her youth. And I will wish her beauty. And I wisdom. And I a tender heart. So spake the fairies and went on their way, leaving the most beautiful maiden in the world behind them. The next morning, when the king looked out from his window and saw this lovely creature hanging by the nail, "Ah, what have I done? Surely I must have been blind last night." So he ordered long ladders to be brought and the maiden to be rescued. Then he fell on his knees before her and prayed her to forgive him, and a great feast was made in her honor. Some days after, the 90-year-old sister came to the palace and asked for the queen. "Who is this hideous old witch?" said the king. "Oh, an old neighbor of mine, who is half silly," she replied. But the old woman looked at her steadily and knew her again and said, "How have you managed to grow so young and beautiful? I would like to be young and beautiful too." The question she repeated the whole day long, until at length the queen lost patience and said, "I had to cut my head off and this new one grew in its place." Okay. "But, my good woman, if I do that, you will die." But the old woman would listen to nothing, and at last the barber took out his knife and struck the first blow at her neck. "Ah!" she shrieked as she fell in pain. "You fat silver poor extra belly," said the barber, who had been in France. Just because. And at the second blow, her head rolled off, and the old woman was dead, for good and all. Okay, well, that's a fun way to start the night off. Oh. Yeah. Not sure what to think about that one. I know I've read it before because I've got the... Well, no, I haven't read the Pink Fairy book yet. I have it, I just haven't read it. But, damn. Yeah. Fairy tales. Anyway. Okay. Our next... I'm not going to get over that one. Anyway, our next story, which has a great title, Prince Featherhead and the Princess Celandine, from the Green Fairy book. Once upon a time there lived a king and queen who were the best creatures in the world, and so kind-hearted that they could not bear to see their subjects want for anything. The consequence was that they gradually gave away all their treasures, till they positively had nothing left to live upon. And this coming to the ears of their neighbor, King Bruin, he promptly raised a large army and marched into their country. The poor king, having no means of defending his kingdom, was forced to disguise himself with a false beard, and carried his only son, the little Prince Featherhead, in his arms, and accompanied by the queen, to take the best way out of the wild country. They were lucky enough to escape the soldiers of King Bruin, and at last, after unheard of fatigues and adventures, they found themselves in a charming green valley, through which flowed a stream clear as crystal and overshadowed by beautiful trees. As they looked around them with delight, a voice said suddenly, "Fish and see what you will catch." Now, the king had always loved fishing, and never went anywhere without a fishhook or two in his pocket. He drew one out hastily, and the queen lent him her girdle to fasten it to. And it had hardly touched the water before it caught a big fish, which made an excellent meal. And not before they needed it, for they had found nothing until then but a few wild berries and some roots. They thought that for the present they could not do any better than to stay in this delightful place, and the king set to work, and soon built a bower of branches to shelter them. And when it was finished, the queen was so charmed with it that she declared nothing was lacking to complete her happiness but a flock of sheep, which she and the little prince might tend while the king fished. They soon found that the fish were not only abundant and easily caught, but also very beautiful, with glittering scales of every imaginable hue, and before long the king discovered that he could teach them to talk and whistle better than any parrots. Then he determined to carry some of it to the nearest town and try to sell them, and as no one had ever before seen anything like them, the people flocked about him eagerly and bought all that he had caught, so that presently not a house in the city was considered complete without a crystal bowl full of fish, and the king's customers were very particular about having them to match the rest of their furniture, and gave him a vast amount of trouble in choosing them. However, the money he obtained in this way enabled him to buy the queen her flock of sheep, as well as many of the other things which would make life pleasant, so that they never once regretted their lost kingdom. Now, it happened that the fairy of the beech woods lived in the lovely valley to which chance had led our poor fugitives. And it was she who had, in pity of their forlorn condition, sent to the king such good luck to his fishing, and generally taken them under her protection. This she was all the more inclined to do as she loved children. And little Prince Featherhead, who had never cried and grew prettier day by day, had quite won her heart. She made the acquaintance of the king and the queen without at first letting them know that she was a fairy, and soon they took fancy to her, and even trusted her with the precious prince, whom she carried off to her palace, where she regaled him with cakes and tarts and every other good thing. This was the way she chose of making him fond of her. Fairies. But afterwards, as he grew older, she spared no pains in educating and training him as a prince should be trained. But, unfortunately, in spite of all her care, he grew so vain and frivolous that he quitted his peaceful country life in disgust, and rushed eagerly after all the foolish gaieties of the neighboring town. where his handsome face and charming manners speedily made him very popular. The king and queen deeply regretted this alteration in their son, and did not know how to mend matters, since the good old fairy had made him so self-willed. Fairies. Just at this time, the fairy of the beech woods received a visit from an old friend of hers called Celandine, who rushed into her house so breathless with rage that all she could hardly speak. Dear, what is the matter? Said the fairy of the beech woods soothingly. The matter? Cried Celandine. You shall hear all about it. You know that, not content with endowing Celandine, the princess of the Summer Islands, with everything she could desire to make her charming, I actually took the trouble to bring her up myself, and now what does she do but come to me with more coaxings and caresses than usual to beg a favor? And what do you suppose this favor turns out to be, when I have been cajoled into promising to grant it? Nothing more than less than a request that I will take back all my gifts, since, says young madam, if I have all the good fortune to please you, how am I to know what is really I myself? And that's how it will be all my life, whenever I meet anybody. You will see a weariness in life that will be before under these circumstances, and yet assure you that I am not ungrateful for all your kindness. All I did I could, cried Celandine, to make her think better of it, but in vain. After going through the usual ceremony of taking back my gifts, I come to you for a little peace and quietness. But after all, I have not taken anything of consequence from this provoking Celandine. Nature had already made her so pretty, and given her such a ready wit of her own, that she will do perfectly well without me. However, I thought she deserved a little lesson, so, to begin with, I have whisked her off to the desert and left her there. Fairies. What? All alone and without any means of existence? Cried the kind-hearted old fairy. You had better hand her over to me. I don't think so very badly after her, after all. I'll just cure her vanity by making her love someone better than herself. Really, when I should come to consider it, I declare the little minx has shown more spirit and originality in the matter than one expects of a princess. Celandine willingly consented to this arrangement, and the old fairy's first care was to smooth away all the difficulties which surrounded the princess, and lead her by the mossy path overhung with trees to the bower of the king and queen, who still pursued their peaceful life in the valley. They were immensely surprised at her appearance, but her charming face and her deplorably ragged condition, to which the thorns and briars had reduced her once elegant attire, speedily won their compassion. They recognized her as a companion in misfortune, and the queen welcomed her heartily, and begged her to share their simple repast. Celandine greatly accepted their hospitality, and soon told them what had happened to her. The king was charmed with her spirit, while the queen thought she was indeed been daring thus to go against the fairy's wishes. Since it has ended in my meeting you, said the princess, I cannot regret the step I have taken, and if you will let me stay with you, I shall be perfectly happy. Good princess. The king and queen were only too delighted to have this charming princess to supply the place of Prince Featherhead, whom they saw but seldom, since the fairy had provided him with a palace in the neighboring town, where he lived in the greatest luxury, and did nothing but amuse himself from day to night. So Celandine stayed, and helped the queen to keep house, and very soon they loved her dearly. When the fairy of the beech woods came to them, they presented the princess to her, and told her a little story, little thinking that the fairy knew more about Celandine than they did. The old fairy was equally delighted with her, and often invited her to visit her leafy palace, which was the most enchanting place that could be imagined, and full of treasures. Often she would say to the princess, when showing her some wonderful things. "This will do as a wedding gift some day." And Celandine could not help thinking that it was to her that the fairy meant to give the 2 blue wax torches which burned without ever getting smaller, or the diamond from which more diamonds were continually growing, or the boat that sailed underwater, or whatever beautiful or wonderful thing they might happen to be looking at. It is true that she never said so politely, but she certainly allowed the princess to believe it, because she thought a little disappointment would be good for her. But the person she really relied upon for curing Celandine of her vanity was Prince Featherhead. Featherbrain. The old fairy was not at all pleased with the way that he had been going on for some time, but her heart was so soft towards him that she was unwilling to take him away from the pleasures he loved, except by offering him something better, which is not the most effectual mode of correction, though it is without the doubt the most agreeable. However, she did not even hint to the princess that Featherhead was anything but absolutely perfect, and talked of him so much that when at last she announced that he was coming to visit her, Celandine made up her mind that this delightful prince would be certain to fall in love with her at once, and was quite pleased with the idea. The old fairy thought so too, but as this was not at all what she wished, she took care to throw such an enchantment over the princess that she appeared to Featherhead quite ugly and awkward, though to everyone else she looked as usual. So when he arrived at the Leafy Palace, more handsome and fascinating even than ever she had been led to expect, he hardly so much as glanced at the princess, but bestowed all his attention upon the old fairy, to whom he seemed to have 100 things to say. The princess was immediately astonished at his indifference, put on a cold and offended air, which, however, he did not seem to observe. Then, as a last resource, she exerted all her wit and gaiety to amuse him, but with no better success, for he was of an age to be more attracted by beauty than anything else, and though he responded politely enough, it was evident that his thoughts were elsewhere. Celandine was deeply mortified, since, for her part, the prince pleased her very well, and for the first time she bitterly regretted the fairy gifts she had been anxious to get rid of. Prince Featherhead was almost equally puzzled, for he had heard nothing from the king and queen but the praises of this charming princess, and the fact that they had spoken of her so very beautifully only confirmed his opinion that people who live in the country have no taste. He talked to them of his charming acquaintances in town, the beauties he had admired, did admire, or thought he was going to admire, until Celandine, who heard it all, was ready to cry with vexation. The fairy, too, was quite shocked at his conceit, and hit upon the plan for curing him of it. She sent him by an unknown messenger a portrait of Princess Celandine, as she really was, with the inscription of, "All this beauty and sweetness, with a loving heart and a great kingdom, might have been yours but for your well-known fickleness." This message made a great impression upon the prince, but not so much as the portrait. He positively could not tear his eyes away from it, and exclaimed aloud that never, never had he seen anything so lovely and so graceful. Then he began to think that it was too absurd that he, the fascinating Featherhead, should fall in love with the portrait, and to drive away the recollections of his haunting eyes, he rushed back to the town, but somehow everything seemed to have changed. The beauties no longer pleased him. Their witty speeches had ceased to amuse, and, indeed, for their parts, they found the prince far more, less amiable than he had been, and were not sorry when he declared that, after all, a country life suited him best. And he went back to the Leafy Palace. Meanwhile, Princess Celandine had been finding the time pass but slowly with the king and queen, and was only too pleased when Featherhead appeared. She at once noticed the change in him, and was deeply curious to find the reason for it. Far from avoiding her, he now sought her company and seemed to take pleasure in talking to her. And yet the princess did not know for a moment flatter herself with the idea that he was in love with her, though it did not take her long to decide that he certainly loved someone. But one day the princess, wandering sadly by the river, spied Prince Featherhead fast asleep in the shade of a tree, and stole nearer to enjoy the delight of gazing at his dear face unobserved. Judge her astonishment when she saw that he was holding in his hand a portrait of herself. In vain did she puzzle over the apparent contradictoriness of his behavior. Why did he cherish her portrait while he was so fatally indifferent to her herself? At last she found an opportunity of asking him the name of the princess whose picture he carried about with her always. "Alas, how can I tell you?" he replied. "Why should you not?" said the princess timidly. "Surely there is nothing to prevent you." More surprised than ever. "Nothing to prevent me," repeated he, "when my utmost efforts have been failed to discover the lovely original. Should I be so sad if I could but find her? But I do not even know her name." More surprised than ever, the princess asked to be allowed to see the portrait, and after examining it for a few minutes, returned it, remarking shyly that at least the original had every cause to be satisfied with it. "That means you consider it flattered," said the prince severely. "Really, Celandine, I thought better of you, and should have expected you to be above such contemptible jealousy. But all women are alike." "Indeed, I meant only that it was a good likeness," said the princess meekly. "Then you know the original?" cried the prince, throwing himself on his knees beside her. "Pray tell me at once who it is, and don't keep me in suspense." "Oh, don't you see that it is meant for me?" cried Celandine. The prince sprang to his feet, hardly able to refrain from telling her that she must be blinded by vanity to suppose she resembled the lovely portrait even in the slightest degree, and gazing at her for an instant with icy surprise, turned and left her without another word, and in a few hours quitted the Leafy Palace altogether. The princes. Now, the princess was indeed unhappy, and could no longer bear to stay in the place where she had been so cruelly disdained. So without even bidding farewell to the king and queen, she left the valley behind her and wandered sadly away, not caring whither. After walking until she was weary, she saw before her a tiny house, and turned her slow steps towards it. The nearer she approached, the more miserable it appeared, and at length she saw a little old woman sitting up on the doorstep, who said grimly, "Oh, here comes one of these fine beggars who are too idle to do anything but run about the country." "Alas, madam," said Celandine, with tears in her pretty eyes, "a sad fate forces me to ask you for shelter." "Didn't I tell you what it would be?" growled the old hag. "From shelter we shall proceed to demand supper, and from supper money to take us on our way. Upon my word, if I could be sure of finding someone every day whose head was so soft as his heart, I wouldn't wish for a more agreeable life myself." But I have worked hard to build my house and secure a morsel to eat, and I suppose you think that I am to give away everything to the first passer-by who chooses to ask for it? Not at all. I wager that a fine lady like you has more money than I have. I must search her and see if it is not so," she added, hobbling towards Celandine with the aid of her walking stick.
"Alas, madam," replied the princess, "I only wish I had. I would give it to you with all my pleasure in the life."
"But you are very smartly dressed for the kind of life you lead," continued the old woman.
"What?" cried the princess. "Do you think I have come to beg from you?"
"I don't know about that," answered she, "but at any rate you don't seem to have come to bring me anything. But what is it that you want? Shelter? Well, that does come at cost much. But after that comes supper, and that I can't hear of. Oh dear no. Why, at your age one is always ready to eat, and now you've been walking, and I suppose you're ravenous."
"Indeed no, madam," answered the poor princess. "I am too sad to be hungry."
"Oh, well, if you will promise to go on being sad, you may stay the night,"
said the old woman mockingly. If you couldn't tell. Thereupon she made the princess sit down beside her and began fingering her silken robe while she muttered,
"Lace on top, lace underneath. This must have cost you a pretty penny. It would have been better to save enough to feed yourself and not come begging to those who want all they have for themselves. Pray, what may you have paid for these fine clothes?"
"Alas, madam," answered the princess, "I did not buy them, and I know nothing about money."
"What do you know, if I may ask?" said the old dame.
"Not much, but indeed I am very unhappy," cried Celandine, bursting into tears. "And if my services are any good to you—"
"Services?" interrupted the hag crossly. "One has to pay for services, and I am not above doing my own work."
"Madam, I will serve you for nothing," said the poor princess, whose spirits were sinking lower and lower. "I will do anything you please. All I wish is to live quietly in this lonely spot."
"Oh, I know you're only trying to take me in," answered she. "And if I do let you serve me, is it fitting that you should be so much better dressed than I am? If I keep you, will you give me your clothes and wear some that I will provide you with? Is it true that I am getting old and may want something to take care of me in some day?"
"Oh, for pity's sake, do what you please with my clothes," cried poor Celandine miserably. And the old woman hobbled off with great electricity, and fetched a little bundle containing a wretched dress, such as the princess had never even seen before, and nimbly skipped around, helping her put it on instead of her own rich robe, with many exclamations of,
"Saints, what a magnificent lining! And the width of it, I will make me 4 dresses at least. Why, child, I wonder you could walk under such the weight. And certainly in my house you would not have had room to turn around."
So saying, she folded up the robe and put it by with great care, while she remarked to Celandine,
"That dress of mine certainly suits you to a marvel. Be sure you take great care of it."
When supper time came, she went into the house, declining all the princess's offers of assistance, and shortly afterwards brought out a very small dish, saying,
"Now let us sup."
Whereupon she handed Celandine a small piece of black bread and uncovered the dish, which contained 2 dried plums.
"We will have one between us," continued the old dame. "As you are the visitor, you shall have the half which contains the stone. But be very careful that you don't swallow it, for I keep them against the winter, and you have no idea what a good fire they make. Now, you take my advice, which won't cost you anything, and remember that it is always more economical to buy fruit with stones on this account."
Celandine, absorbed in her own sad thoughts, did not even hear this prudent counsel, and quite forgot to eat her share of the plum, which delighted the old woman, who put it by carefully for her breakfast, saying,
I am very much pleased with you, and if you go on as you have begun, we shall do very well, and I can teach you many useful things which people don't generally know. For instance, look at my house. It is built entirely of the seeds of all the pears I've eaten in my life.
Wow.
Now, most people throw them away, and that only shows that the number of things are wasted for want of a little patience and ingenuity.
But Celandine did not find it possible to be interested in this and similar pieces of advice, and the old woman soon sent her to bed for fear the night air might give her an appetite. She passed a sleepless night, but in the morning the old dame remarked,
I heard how well you slept. After such a night you cannot want any breakfast. While I was in the household tasks, you had better stay in bed, since the more one sleeps, the less one needs to eat. And as it is market day, I will go to town and buy a penny's worth of bread for the week's eating.
Dang. And so she chattered on, but poor Celandine did not hear her nor heed her, and she wandered out into the desolate country to think over her sad fate. However, the good fairy of the beech woods did not want her to be starved, so she sent her an unlooked-for relief in the shape of a beautiful white cow, which followed her back to the tiny house. When the old woman saw her, her joy knew no bounds.
Aha! Now we can have milk and cheese and butter, cried she. Ah, how good milk is! What a pity it's so ruinously expensive.
So they made a little shelter of branches for the beautiful creature, which was quite gentle, and followed Celandine about like a dog when she took it out every day to graze. One morning she sat back on the little brook, thinking sadly. She suddenly saw a young stranger approaching and got up quickly, intending to avoid him. But Prince Featherhead, for it was he, perceiving her at the same moment, rushed towards her with every demonstration of joy, for he had recognized her, not as the Celandine whom he had slighted, but as the lovely princess whom he had sought vainly for so long. The fact was that the fairy of the beech woods, thinking she had been punished enough, had withdrawn the enchantment from her, and transferred it to Featherhead, thereby in an instant depriving him of the good looks which he had done so much towards making him the fickle creature he is. Throwing himself down at the princess's feet, he implored her to say, and at least speak to him, and she was at last consented, but only because he seemed to wish it so very much. After that he came every day in hope of meeting her again, and often expressed his delight at being with her. But one day, when he had been begging Celandine to love him, she confided to him that it was quite impossible, since her heart was already occupied entirely by another.
I have, she said, the unhappiness of loving a prince who is fickle, frivolous, proud, incapable of caring for anyone but himself, who has been spoilt by flattery, and, to crown all, who does not love me.
But, cried Prince Featherhead, surely you cannot care for so contemptible and worthless a creature as that.
Alas, but I do care, answered the princess, weeping.
But where can his eyes be, said the prince, that your beautiful makes no impression on him? As for me, since I have possessed through a portrait, I have wandered over the whole world to find you, and now we have met, I see that you are 10 times lovelier than I could have ever imagined, and I would give all to win your love.
The portrait,
cried Celandine with sudden interest.
Is it possible that Prince Featherhead can have parted with it?
He would sooner part with his own life, lovely princess, he answered. I can assure you of that, for I am Prince Featherhead. At the same moment, the Fairy of the Beech Woods took away the enchantment, and the happy princess recognized her lover, and now truly hers. For the trials they had both undergone had so changed and improved them that they were capable of a real love for each other. You can imagine how perfectly happy they were, and how much they had to hear and to tell. But at length it was time to go back to the little house, and as they went along, Celandine remembered, for the first time, what a ragged old dress she was wearing, and what an odd appearance she must present. But the prince declared that she became vastly, and that he thought it most picturesque. When they reached the house, the old woman received them very crossly.
I declare, said she, that is perfectly true. Wherever there's a girl, you may be sure that a young man will appear before long. But don't imagine that I'm going to have you here. Not a bit of it. Be off with you, and my fine fellow.
Prince Featherhead was so inclined to be angry at this uncivil reception, but he was really too happy to care much. He only demanded, on Celadine's behalf, that the old dame should give her back her own attire, that she might go away suitably dressed. This request roused her to a fury, since she had counted upon the princess's fine robes to clothe her for the rest of her life, so that it was some time before the prince could make himself heard to explain that he was willing to pay for them. The sight of a handful of gold pieces somewhat mollified her. However, and after making them both promise faithfully that on no consideration would they ask for the gold back again, she took the princess into the house and grudgingly doled out to her just enough of her gay attire to make her presentable, while the rest she pretended to have lost. After this they found that they were very hungry, for one cannot live on love alone, and any more than you could on air. And then the old woman's lamentations were louder than before.
What?
She cried.
Feed people who are happy as all that? Why, it is simply ruinous.
But as the prince began to look angry, she, with many sighs and mutterings, brought out a morsel of bread, a bowl of milk, and 6 plums, with which the lovers were well content. For as long as they could look at one another, they really did not know what they were eating. It seemed as if they could go on forever in their reminiscences, the prince telling how he had wandered all over the world from beauty to beauty, always to be disappointed when he found that no one resembled the portrait. Yet, the princess wondering how it was he could have been so long with her and yet have never recognized her, and over again pardoning him for his cold and haughty behavior to her.
For,
She said,
you see, Featherhead, I love you, and love makes everything right. But we cannot stay here, she added. What are we to do?
The prince thought they had better find their way to the Fairy of the Beech Woods, and put themselves once more under her protection. And they had hardly agreed upon this course when 2 little chariots, wreathed with jasmine and honeysuckle, suddenly appeared, and stepping into them, they were whirled away to the leafy palace. Just before they lost sight of the little house, they heard loud cries and lamentations from the miserly old dame, and looking around perceived that the beautiful cow was vanishing in spite of her frantic efforts to hold it fast. And they afterwards heard that she spent the rest of her life trying to put a handful of gold the prince had thrown into a money bag. For the fairy, as a punishment for her avarice, caused it to slip out again as fast as she dropped it in. Fairies. The Fairy of the Beech Woods ran to welcome the prince and princess with open arms, only too delighted to find them so much improved that she could, with a clear conscience, begin to spoil them again. Very soon the fairy Celandine also arrived, bringing the king and queen with her. Princess Celandine implored her pardon, which she gave graciously. Indeed, the princess was so charming she could refuse her nothing. She also restored her to the Summer Islands, and promised her protection in all things. The Fairy of the Beechwoods then informed the king and queen that their subjects had chased King Bruin from the throne and were waiting to welcome them back again. But they at once abdicated in favor of Prince Featherhead, declaring that nothing could induce them to forsake their peaceful life, and the fairies undertook to see the prince and princess established in their beautiful kingdoms. Their marriage took place the next day, and they lived happily ever afterwards, for Celandine was never vain, and Featherhead was never fickle anymore. I like doing that old hag's voice. That was just felt like doing Monty Python sketches, honestly.
Mr. Mischievous! Cast you bear the...
No. That's some water. I have not drunk anything today. I swear. I'm completely sober doing this. Oh, I just like fairy tale voices, honestly. I just wish my microphone could pick up the voices better. It just sounds like, I don't know. It sounds different to me than it probably does to you, but it's, I don't know. I'm using a headset mic, and this is pretty much what I can afford. Oh. Old woman's complaining about beggars. That's just funny. I really need to figure out how to do my mouth better. Anyway, next story.
I'm gonna have a hard time doing this a lot now.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay. The next story. Catherine and Her Destiny from the Pink Fairy book. Long ago, there lived a rich merchant who, besides possessing more treasures than any king in the world, had in his great hall 3 chairs, one of silver, one of gold, and one of diamonds. But his greatest treasure of all was his only daughter, whom he called Catherine. One day, Catherine was sitting in her room when suddenly the door flew open, and in came a tall and beautiful woman holding in her hands a little wheel. "Catherine," she said, going up to the girl, "would you rather have a happy youth or a happy old age?" Catherine was so taken by surprise that she did not know what to answer, and the lady repeated again, "Would you rather have a happy youth or a happy old age?" Then Catherine thought to herself, "If I say a happy youth, then I shall have to suffer all the rest of my life. No, I would bear trouble now, and have something better to look forward to." So she looked up and replied, "Give me a happy old age." "So be it," said the lady, and turned her wheel as she spoke. vanishing the next moment as suddenly as she had come in. Now, this beautiful old lady was the destiny of poor Catherine. Only a few days after this, the merchant heard news that all his finest ships, laden with the richest merchandise, had been sunk in a storm, and he was left a beggar. A shock was too much for him. He took to his bed, and in a short time he was dead of all his disappointment. So poor Catherine was left alone in the world without a penny or a creature to help her. But she was a brave girl and full of spirit, and soon made up her mind that the best thing she could do was to go to the nearest town and become a servant. She lost no time in getting herself ready, and did not take long over her journey. As she was passing down the chief street of the town, a noble lady saw her out of her window, and, struck by her sad face, said to her, "Where are you going all alone, my pretty girl?" "Ah, my lady, I am very poor and must go to service to earn my bread." "I will take you into my service," she said, and Catherine served her very well. Some time after, her mistress said to Catherine, "I am obliged to go out for a long while and must lock the house door, so that no thieves shall get in." So she went away, and Catherine took her work and sat down at the window. Suddenly the door burst open, and in came her destiny. "Oh, so here you are, Catherine. Did you really think I was going to leave you in peace?" And as she spoke, she walked to the linen press where Catherine's mistress kept all her finest sheets and underclothes, tore everything in pieces, and flung them on the floor. Poor Catherine wrung her hands and wept, for she thought to herself, "When my lady comes back and sees all this ruin, she will think it's my fault." And starting up, she fled through the open door. Then Destiny took all the pieces and made them whole again, and put them back in the press. And when everything was tidy, she too left the house. When the mistress reached home, she called Catherine, but no Catherine was there. "Can she have robbed me?" thought the old lady, and looked hastily around her house, but nothing was missing. She wondered why Catherine should have disappeared like this, but she heard no more of her, and in a few days she had filled her place. Meanwhile, Catherine wandered on, without knowing very well where she was going, till at last she came to another town. Just as before, a noble lady happened to see her passing by her window, and called out to her, "Where are you going all alone, my pretty girl?" And Catherine replied, "Ah, my lady, I am very poor, and must go to service to earn my bread." "I will take you into my service," said the lady, and Catherine served her well, and hoped she might now be left in peace. But, exactly as before, as Catherine was left in the house all alone, Destiny came in and spoke with her with hard words. "What? Are you here now?" And in a passion she tore the house, tore everything up she could find, till in sheer misery poor Catherine rushed out. And so it befell for 7 years. And directly Catherine was found a fresh place, her destiny came and forced her to leave it. After 7 years, however, Destiny seemed to get tired of persecuting her, and at a time of peace set for Catherine. When she had been chased away from her last house by Destiny's wicked pranks, she had taken service with another lady who told her that it would be part of her daily work to walk to a mountain that overshadowed the town, and climbing up to the top, she was to lay some loaves of freshly baked bread and cry out with a loud voice, "Destiny, O mistress," 3 times, and then her lady's destiny would come and take away the offering. "That I will gladly do," said Catherine. So the years went by, and Catherine was still there, and every day she climbed the mountain with her basket of bread on her arm. She was happier than she had been, but sometimes when no one saw her, she would weep as though She thought over her old life and how different everything was to the one she was now leading. One day her lady saw her and said,
Catherine, what is it? Why are you always weeping?
and then Catherine told her.
I have an idea,
Exclaimed the lady.
Tomorrow, when you take your bread to the mountain, you shall pray my destiny speak to yours, and entreat her to leave you in peace. Perhaps something may come of it.
At these words, Catherine dried her eyes, and the next morning, when she climbed the mountain, she told all that she had suffered and cried,
Oh, Destiny, my mistress, pray, I entreat you, of my destiny that she may leave me in peace.
And Destiny answered,
Oh, my poor girl, know you not your destiny lies buried under 7 coverlids and can hear nothing? But if you will come tomorrow, I will bring her with me.
And after Catherine had gone away, her lady's Destiny, and went to find her sister, and said to her,
Dear sister, has not Catherine suffered enough? It is surely time for her good days to begin.
and the sister answered,
Tomorrow you shall bring her to me, and I will give her something that may help her out of her need.
The next morning, Catherine set out earlier than usual for the mountain, and her lady's Destiny took the girl by her hand and led her to her sister, who lay under the 7 coverlids. And her Destiny held out to Catherine a ball of silk, saying,
Keep this. It may be useful some day.
then pulled the coverings over her head again. But Catherine walked sadly down the hill and went straight to her lady and showed her the silken ball, which was the end of all her high hopes.
What shall I do with it? She asked. It is not worth 6pence, and it is no good to me. Take care of it, replied her mistress. Who can tell how useful this may be?
A little while after this grand preparations were made for the king's marriage, and all the tailors in the town were busy embroidering fine cloths. The wedding garment was so beautiful nothing like it had ever been seen before, but when it was almost finished, the tailor found that he had no more silk. The color was very rare, and none could be found like it. And the king made a proclamation that if anyone happened to possess any, they should bring it to the court, and he would give them a large sum.
Catherine,
exclaimed the lady, who had been to the tailor's and seen the wedding garment,
your ball of silk is exactly the right color. Bring it to the king, and you can ask what you'd like for it.
Then Catherine put on her best clothes and went to the court, and looked more beautiful than any woman there.
May it please your majesty, she said, I have brought you a ball of silk of the color you asked, as no one else has any in the town.
Your majesty, asked one of the courtiers, shall I give the maiden its weight in gold? The king agreed, and a pair of scales was brought, but a handful of gold was placed on one scale and the silken ball on the other. But lo, let the king lay on the scales as many pieces of gold as he would. The silk was always heavier still. Then the king took some larger scales and heaped up all his treasures on one side. But the silk on the other outweighed them all. At last there was only one thing left that had not been put in, and that was his golden crown. He took it from his head and set it on top of all, and at last the scale moved, and the ball found its balance. Where have you got this silk? asked the king.
It was given me, royal majesty, by my mistress,
replied Catherine. That is not true, said the king, and if you do not tell me the truth, I will have your head cut off this instant. So Catherine told him the whole story and how she had once been as rich as he. Now there lived in the court a wise woman, and she said to Catherine,
"You have suffered much, my poor girl, but at length your luck has turned, and I know by the weighing of the scales of the crown that you will die a queen."
"So she shall," cried the king, who overheard these words. "She shall die my queen, for she is more beautiful than all the ladies of the court, and I will marry no one else." And so it fell out. The king sent back the bride he had promised to wed to her own country, and the same Catherine was queen at the marriage feast instead, and lived happily and contented to the end of her life. Wow. That is one heavy ball of silk. And I feel bad for the queen that should have been married to the king. That's just, as the dress was being made for her. I mean, come on. Wonder why Destiny was so picky about that. It's like, well, you can be a happy child, or you can be happy when you get old. Doesn't mean you have to make them freaking miserable when they're a kid. Oh well. But I digress. And let's see. Perhaps one more story. Let's see. Story 3, Wonderful Beggars. Let's see how long this was. I've not got the beast yet. Ooh. This one is 6 pages. One after that is 13. I haven't even gotten to the beasts part of this book yet. I'm still in the beauties. But as it were, our next story of wonder, of magic and intrigue, or just a fairy tale, is the story of 3 wonderful beggars from the Violet Fairy Book. There once lived a merchant whose name was Mark, whom people called Mark the Rich. He was a very hard-hearted man, for he could not bear poor people, and if he caught sight of a beggar anywhere near his house, he would order the servants to drive him away, or would set the dogs on him. One day 3 very poor old men came begging at the door, and just as he was going to let the fierce dogs loose on them, his little daughter, Anastasia, crept close to him and said,
"Dear Daddy, let the poor old men sleep here tonight. To please me."
Well, her father could not bear to refuse her, and the 3 beggars were allowed to sleep in a loft, and at night, when everyone else in the house was fast asleep, little Anastasia got up, climbed up to the loft, and peeped in. The 3 old men stood in the middle of the loft, leaning on their sticks, with their long gray beards flowing down over their hands, and were talking together in low voices. "What news is there?" asked the eldest. "In the next village, the peasant Ivan has just had his 7th son. What shall we name him, and what fortune shall we give him?" said the second. The third whispered, "Call him Vasily, and give him all the property of the hard-hearted man whose loft we stand, and who wanted to drive us from his door." After a little more talk, the 3 made themselves ready and crept away softly. Anastasia, who had heard every word, ran straight to her father and told him all. Mark was very much surprised. He thought and thought, and in the morning he drove to the next village to try and find out if such a child really had just been born. He went first to the priest and asked him about the children in his parish. "Yesterday," said the priest, "a boy was born into the poorest house of the village. I named the unlucky little thing Vasily. He is the seventh son, and the eldest is only 7 years old, and they hardly have a mouthful among them all. We can be got to stand godfather to such a little beggar boy." The merchant's heart beat fast, and his mind was full of bad thoughts about the poor little baby. He would be godfather himself, he said, and he ordered a fine christening feast, so the child was brought and christened, and Mark was very friendly to its father. After the ceremony was over, he took Ivan aside and said, "Look here, my friend, you are a poor man. How can you afford to bring up the boy? Give him to me, and I'll make something of him, and I'll give you a present of 1,000 crowns. Is it a bargain?" Ivan scratched his head and thought, and then he agreed. Mark counted out the money, wrapped the baby up in a fox skin, and laid it in the sledge beside him, and drove back towards home. When he had driven some miles, he drew up, carried the child to the edge of a steep precipice, and threw it over, muttering, "There, now try to take my property." Okay. Very soon after this, some foreign merchants traveled along the same road on the way to see Mark and to pay the 12,000 crowns which they had owed him. As they were passing near the precipice, they heard the sound of crying, and on looking over they saw a little green meadow wedged in between two great heaps of snow. On the meadow lay a baby among the flowers. The merchants picked up the child, wrapped it up carefully, and drove out. When they saw Mark, they told him what a strange thing they had found. Mark guessed at once that the child must be his godson, and asked to see him, and they said, "That's a nice little fellow. I should like to keep him. If you will make him over to me, I will let you off your debt." The merchants were very pleased to make so good a bargain, and left the child with Mark and drove off. At night, Mark took the child, put it in a barrel, fastened the lid tight down, and threw it into the sea. The barrel floated away to a great distance, and at last it floated close up to a monastery. The monks were just spreading out their nets to dry on the shore when they heard the sound of crying. It seemed to come from a barrel which was bobbing about near the water's edge. They drew it into land and opened it, and there was a little child. When the abbot heard the news, he decided to bring up the boy and named him Vasily. The boy lived on with the monks and grew up to be a clever, gentle, and handsome young man. No one could read, write, or sing better than he, and he did everything so well that the abbot made him wardrobe keeper. Now, it happened about this time that the merchant Mark came to the monastery in the course of a journey. The monks were very polite to him and showed him their house and church and all they had. When he went to the church, the choir was singing, and one voice was so clear and beautiful that he asked who it belonged to. The abbot told him that the wonderful way in which Vasily had come to them, and Mark saw clearly that this must be his godson, whom he had twice tried to kill. He said to the abbot, "Can you tell me how much I enjoy the young man's singing? If he could only come with me, I would make him the overseer of all my business. As you say, he is good and clever. Do spare him to me, and I will make his fortune, and will present your monastery with 20,000 crowns. The abbot hesitated a good deal, but he consulted along all the other monks, and at last they decided they ought to stand in the way of Vasily's good fortune. Then Mark wrote a letter to his wife and gave it to Vasily to take to her. And in this letter, this is what he wrote. When the bearer of this letter arrives, take him into the soap factory. When you pass near the great boiler, push him in. If you don't obey my orders, I shall be very angry, for this young man is a bad fellow who is sure to ruin us and off our lives. Vasily had a good voyage, and on landing, he set off on foot to Mark's home. On the way there, he met 3 beggars who asked him,
"Where are you going, Vasily?"
"I'm going to the house of Mark the merchant, and I have a letter for his wife," replied Vasily.
"Show us the letter."
Vasily handed them the letter. They blew on it, and gave it back to him, saying,
"Now go and give the letter to Mark's wife. You will not be forsaken."
Vasily reached the house and gave the letter. When the mistress read it, she could hardly believe her eyes and called for her daughter. In the letter was written quite plainly, "When you receive this letter, get ready for a wedding, and let the bearer be married next day to my daughter, Anastasia. If you don't obey my orders, I shall be very angry." Good guys, those beggars. Anastasia saw the bearer of the letter, and he pleased her very much. They dressed Vasily in fine clothes, and the next day he was married to Anastasia. In due time, Mark returned from his travels. His wife, daughter, and son-in-law all went out to meet him. When Mark saw Vasily, he flew into a terrible rage with his wife. "How dared you marry her, my daughter, without my consent?"
"I only carried out your orders," said she. "Here is your letter."
Mark read it. It certainly was his handwriting, but by no means his wishes. "Well," thought he, "you've escaped me 3 times, but I think I shall get the better of you now." He waited a month, and was very kind and pleasant to his daughter and her husband. At the end of that time, he said to Vasily one day, "I want you to go from me to my friend the Serpent King in the beautiful country at the world's end. 12 years ago he built a castle on some land of mine. I want you to ask for the rent for those 12 years, and also to find out from him what has become of my 12 ships which sailed for his country 3 years ago." Vasily dared not disobey. He said goodbye to his young wife, who cried bitterly at parting, hung a bag of biscuits over her shoulder, and set out. I really cannot tell you whether this journey was long or short. He tramped along so suddenly he heard a voice saying, "Vasily, where are you going?" Vasily looked about him, and seeing no one, he called out, "Who spoke to me?" "I did, this old wide-spreading oak. Tell me where you're going." "I am going to the Serpent King to receive 12 years' rent from him." "When the time comes, remember me and ask the king. Rotten to the roots, half dead but still green, stands the old oak. Is it to stand much longer on this earth?" Vasily went on further. He came to a river and got into the ferry boat. The old ferryman said, "Are you going far, my friend?" "I'm going to the Serpent King." "Then think of me and say to the king, 'For 30 years the ferryman has rowed to and fro. Will the tired old man have to row much longer?'" "Very well," said Vasily. "I'll ask him." And he walked on. In time he came to a narrow strait of the sea, and across it lay a great whale, over whose back people walked, and drove on it as if he was a bridge or a road. As he stepped on the whale, it said, "Do tell me where you are going." "I'm going to the Serpent King." And the whale begged, "Think of me and say to the king, the poor whale has been lying 3 years across the strait, and men and horses have nearly trampled his back into his ribs. is he to lie there much longer? I will remember, said Vasily, and went on. And he walked, and he walked, and he walked, until he came to a great green meadow. In the meadow stood a large and splendid castle. Its white marble walls sparkled in the light. The roof was covered in mother of pearl, which shone like a rainbow, and the sun glowed like fire on the crystal windows. Vasily walked in and went from one room to another, astonished at all the splendor he saw. When he reached the last room of all, he found a beautiful girl sitting on a bed. As soon as she saw him, she said,
"Oh, Vasily, what brings you to this accursed place?"
Vasily told her why he had come and all he had seen and heard on the way. The girl said,
"You have not been sent here to collect rents, but for your own destruction, and that the serpent may devour you."
She had not time to say more when the whole castle shook, and a rustling, hissing, groaning sound was heard. The girl quickly pushed Vasily into a chest under the bed, and locked it, and whispered,
"Listen to what the serpent and I talk about."
Then she rose up to receive the Serpent King. The monster rushed into the room and threw itself, panting, on the bed, crying, "I've flown half over the world. I'm tired, very tired, and want to sleep. Scratch my head." The beautiful girl sat down near him, stroking his hideous head, and said in a sweet, coaxing voice,
"You know everything in the world. After you left, I had such a wonderful dream. Will you tell me what it means?"
"Out with it quick, then. What was it?"
"I dreamt I was walking on a wide road, and an oak tree said to me, 'Ask the king this. Rotten at the roots, half dead, and yet green stands the old oak. Is it to stand much longer on this earth?'
"It must stand till one comes and pushes it down with his foot. Then it will fall, and under its roots will be found more gold and silver than even Mark the Rich has got."
Then I dreamt I came to a river, and the old ferryman said to me, 'For 30 years the ferryman has rowed to and fro. Will the tired old man have to row much longer?'
That depends on himself. If someone gets into the boat to be ferried across, the old man only has to push the boat off and go on his way without looking back. The man in the boat will then have to take his place."
And at last I dreamt that I was walking over a bridge made of a whale's back, and the living bridge spoke to me and said, 'Here I have been stretched out for these 3 years. The men and horses have trampled my back down into my ribs. Must I lie here much longer?'
"He will have to lie there until he has thrown up 12 ships of Mark the Rich he has swallowed. Then he may plunge back into the sea and heal his back." And the Serpent King closed his eyes, turned around on his other side, and began to snore so loud that the windows rattled. In all haste, the lovely girl helped Vasily out of the chest, and showed him part of his way back. He thanked her very politely and hurried off. When he reached the strait, the whale asked, "Have you thought of me?" "Yes, as soon as I am on the other side, I will tell you what you want to know." And when he was on the other side, Vasily said to the whale, Throw up those 12 ships of marks which you have swallowed 3 years ago. The great fish heaved itself up and threw up all 12 ships and their crews. And then he shook himself for joy and plunged into the sea. Vasily went on further until he reached the ferry, where the old man asked,
Did you think of me?
Yes, and as soon as you have ferried me across, I will tell you what you want to know. When they were finally crossed over, Vasily said, Let the next man who comes stay in the boat, but do you step on shore and push the boat off, and you will be free, and the other man must take your place. Then Vasily went on further still, and soon came to the old oak tree, pushed it with his foot, and it fell over. There at the roots was more gold and silver than even Mark the Rich had. And now the 12 ships which the whale had thrown up came sailing along and anchored close by. On the deck of the first ship stood the 3 beggars whom Vasily had met formerly, and they said, Heaven has blessed you, Vasily. Then they vanished away, and he never saw them again. The sailors carried all the gold and silver into their ship, and then they set sail for home, with Vasily on board. Mark was more furious than ever. He had his horses harnessed and drove off himself to see the Serpent King, and to complain of the way in which he had been betrayed. When he reached the river, he sprang into the ferry boat. The ferryman, however, did not get in, but pushed the boat off. Vasily led a good and happy life with his dear wife and his kind mother-in-law, who lived with him. He helped the poor and fed the clothed and hungry and naked, and all Mark's riches became his. For many years, Mark has been ferrying people across the river. His face is wrinkled now. His hair and beard are snow white. His eyes are dim. But still, he rows on. Love a good comeuppance story. People should really stop trying to get rid of the prophesized children. Nothing good ever comes of it. Okay, 10:43. Oh, do I dare, do I dare. How many pages is it? Into the beauty segment, and then I can get into the beastie stories. So I so want to get into the beastie stories. A lot shorter. Okay, next story is 13 pages. And then another 15 pages after that, and I get into the beasts. What say you, lurkers? Do I try to do 2 more stories tonight? Doot. See if I can figure out how to do this. Create a new poll. I'm going to take a quick break. But I will put the story up. Not the story, poll. Yeah, poll thing. So I want to see how it works. I've never done a poll before. Okay, I will be right back.
Okay, well, no one voted. So I guess that means I will find someone to raid. In the meantime, I would like to thank everyone who did come in and lurk and listen and generally be here. If at least not partially anyway. If anyone has any raid suggestions, I'll gladly take them. If not, I will just go over my friend list and see who's on. Again, I do have the book. It's linked to my pretty much the print order is down there in my links below. I also have it listed on my Throne storefront. I am still trying to get the collection to do the story cover artwork. Well, the Storyteller cover artwork. Man, that's hard to say. I think I'm at $80, but I don't have it listed on Coffee properly. I just have it still saying 43 on there. Yeah. I do appreciate everyone who came in. As I know Guilty was here, and then I know that Evie was here. I really try not to pay attention to how many people it says are here. But, you know, especially since two of them are probably me. Anyway, I'm not going to explain the two of them being me. Let's see who is on. I don't see any of the other storytellers. Waste is doing art. Let's see what they're doing. Okay, just doing art apparently. I'm drawing a boot. Okay, I guess he's drawing void. Okay, well. And the Blurkin is channeling me. In Red Dusk. Who else is a red? Is I wonder. What was that? See. Okay. What's Maddie doing? What the? Oh. Yeah, let's raid Maddie.
or Mochi. Both names work. So anyway, one read message. Two read message. And yeah, that's right, Mochi. But anyway, again, thank you everyone for coming in, listening to me laugh at my own voice, and oh, my writer's vanished. Oh well, I will see you there. Have a good evening, morning, afternoon, whichever it may be for you, and just have a good one. See you all there. Unless you're already there, like guilty.